React still feels insane, and no one is talking about it. I saw this article, and as soon as I did, I knew I was going to have to read it with y'all and talk about my thoughts. Apparently, nobody's talking about this, so I figured I should probably be the one to do it. As you know, I've been writing React code for a while, and I've been seeing fewer of these like React is terrible takes lately, but every once in a while one comes up and it feels like they're increasingly delusional, honestly. And I'm really excited to see where this one goes. There's always some good points in these, and I like to try and find them and bring out the good parts of these takedowns. But I have legitimately no idea where this one's going to go. I have a feeling this will be a wild ride, and it's also going to probably raise my blood pressure. Sadly, the author is not paying me, so they will not be covering my medical bills. As such, quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll get right back to it. I don't know about you guys, but I've been building a lot more stuff recently. It's gotten so much easier with AI. But there's a couple pieces that haven't gotten easier, especially if you want to do them right. One of the biggest, by far, is authentication. Doing auth in a way that is both safe and secure, and more importantly, ready for big businesses now that they're actually going to try out your stuff. It's not fun. And if you're trying to spin up a project that might become a startup, or you're just trying to integrate auth correctly in your existing product, none of this is fun to do. And as simple as it is to roll your own, doing that at scale is not something I'd wish on my worst enemy. Take my word for it, it was not fun. That's why I'm super pumped about today's sponsor, WorkOS. These guys get auth, but more importantly, they get enterprise, and they get what you expect as a full-stack TypeScript developer. You can take my word for it, or just look at the other companies using them. This is like almost every company that I use the products of here. It's almost hilarious how often I'm going to sign into some tool and I see the WorkOS AuthKit sign-in flow. You know it when you see it because it's everywhere now. And as much as you and I probably will love it, admins are going to love it way more. Those IT teams at different companies that have to set up SAML, SSO, Okta, and all that crap, no more back and forth trying to make sure you get it all right. It's very hand-holdy and it's not very fun. Unless you use WorkOS and you add the admin portal, then you literally just send a link to the team. They can onboard with whichever auth provider they like to use, and you're done. Seriously, the amount of time this can save everyone is unbelievable, and it will help you convert these really big enterprises. Oh, by the way, up to 1 million users for free. I think that's a pretty good deal. If you agree, check them out today at soydev.link/workos. Let's figure out why React still feels insane. Recently, I did a side project that I wrote about in the other post. What's the other post? Side project we actually finished. Cool. Part of it, I had what was supposed to be just a few paragraphs on how React sucks, but I couldn't stop writing about it. So here it is, a full standalone blog post, even bigger than the one that it sprang from, all about how React sucks and how it might not even be its own fault. That just made me even more interested to read this. Oh boy. Ye old Angular. In my junior days, down on the streets, I used to do AngularJS for money. At the time, it was a seriously good piece of technology. Definitely the biggest JS framework of its time. And what's most important to its legacy, probably the first time web devs had a real framework. Prior to that, they were all just libraries. This was the first one that gave you not only a set of functions to use, but the actual framework in which you build your web apps. Very much true. Most other solutions pre-Angular were very here's how you add the script tag to the project. Here's how you access elements on the page that are already there, because they're all assuming you're adding it to an existing thing. Angular really took the ground up approach of here's how we think about building a new web application from scratch. Hell, Angular is the reason that we got something like TypeScript. TypeScript was a huge bet that Angular made going from 1 to 2, from AngularJS to Angular, because they wanted you to have a whole build. They wanted you to think about your app as a thing that was built and compiled and tested and checked and run, not as a bunch of JS scripts just floating around the web. And that's a huge impact that Angular does deserve credit for. Things are always only good in relative, and Angular was good because its predecessors were not. I like this framing, actually. I didn't think I was going to dig where they're coming from so much, but the idea that good is a relative term, that it is defining not how objectively good or bad a thing is, but where it lands based on what we currently know and use. And Angular absolutely was good because its predecessors didn't solve the problems that it solved. At the time, we did have other SPA frameworks like Backbone and Knockout, but they didn't leave as much of an impact. The real enemy that Angular beat was jQuery. Even though jQuery was only a wrapper over the, at the time, very shoddy HTML DOM APIs, it still became a de facto standard if you wanted to build a complex web app. How it worked was pretty straightforward. You create HTML elements in JS, manually and imperatively, then you modify them, move them around, and do whatever it takes to make the website interactive as though it is an app. This all works completely fine for simple apps, but you can imagine it becoming a maintenance nightmare in case of anything bigger. Absolutely. Anybody who says jQuery is totally fine has a really cool blog and nothing more sophisticated than that. If jQuery is good enough to build a scalable solution with the thing that you're solving, you're not solving anything even vaguely interesting. Even building something like Twitter, like a basic Twitter clone or a Trello board and stuff like that, good luck, have fun doing that in jQuery, especially when you bring another dev in. If you try to access an element that isn't actually on the page, or maybe there's two of them on the page, the whole model falls apart because you're literally like wiring spaghetti between things. There is no deterministic top to bottom when you're building with jQuery. You're adding behaviors to elements and hoping that both exist in the right place at the right time. This is exactly what started to happen. You can't really blame jQuery, only the appetites of modern users who needed that kind of interactivity everywhere. Devs were blindsided to keep using jQuery even though it wasn't a good fit for the job anymore. Then Angular arrived and had it all sorted out. You could focus your energy on writing the UI and app logic instead of manually assembling individual pieces of HTML. It truly was a game-changing framework. Notice he crossed off library there. As you finally had a proper tool to make big interactive applications. Some magic things it had. We'll go over those in a sec, but I really want to emphasize this point. Google made Angular because they had just built a bunch of really prominent web applications like Gmail, and it was hurting them more and more every day how painful it was to scale up these projects, add more people to the team, add new features, and keep everything from breaking. They needed something better, and Angular was what they built to solve the problem of Google wanting to build more and more interactive applications on the web. The first part that Angular added that was really nice was components. It had weird names, so they were actually called directives. But in any case, you could define a simple HTML and JS file combo representing a piece of UI and then reuse it across multiple places in the app. Reusable elements is a thing that you would be amazed how hard web dev was without it, that we went as far and hard as we did without them. The reusable part of the web was CSS. You could reuse the styles, and everything else you had to redefine. Next was two-way binding. You define a variable, and whenever it changes, all the places in the UI are updated. This works really well. Later, people started nagging that this omnidirectional data flow is bad. There was a push to a one-way, top-to-bottom bindings instead, which does sound technically better, but in practice it makes everything more complicated and started a strand of discussion, which ended with us all having to use Redux today. So thanks. You were doing so good, bud. God, Excalibur time. Complexity is a spectrum. On the left here, we'll have simple, static page. And on the other end, we'll have complex as hell, Figma. This is the spectrum of complexity in apps. And different solutions work well, I would say work best for different things. For example, if you're building a blog, that fits down there. And that blog will be served really well with technologies like HTMX or Astro. As you get more interactive, the range at which these things cover changes. If we were to think of this as ranges in that way, what's the range that jQuery covers? Obviously, it covers really simple stuff. If it's static, you barely even need jQuery, but whatever. And there are spots throughout this where things get more or less interactive. Like at some point, we have like an e-commerce site. E-commerce site has a certain amount of interactivity that is needed for it to be a good experience. Then you have something more complex, like a social media feed. And something even more complex and interactive, like a video call app. And as you get to these different tiers of complexity, the tools that are and aren't useful shift. You can argue which ones are more or less useful in which parts, but honestly, I hope we can all agree something like React fits really well from e-commerce site to video call app. But once you hit a certain level of complexity, once you're living inside of the canvas, you're building most of Figma's stuff in React would not be very fun. And you also don't need it for a simple static page. So where does Angular fit? I would argue that Angular does about that, especially if you're doing two-way bindings. Certain patterns only work well at certain sizes. And the fun thing here is that as you go further left, the frameworks and the code you write with them gets simpler. If you are going really far to the left here, you're building simple things, and you're picking something like React and Redux to build it with, the complexity that you're eating is entirely unnecessary, and it's going to feel like the tool is bad because it is harder than the problem that you're solving is. But if you take something like HTMX, which works really well to like there. There's a certain level of complexity at which HTMX stops being beneficial to you and starts to hurt you a bit. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it for things there. It doesn't mean you shouldn't reach for it when your complexity of your web apps gets more and more complex. But it does mean that it stops being useful at a point, and it is time to reach for things that handle complex state management better. Another thing on this spectrum is that with the complexity changes, the number of employees and the number of people on the team tends to change as well. As the thing you're building gets more complex, the number of people who have to work on it increases too. And the solutions that handle that well are more and more valuable as you go from left to right. The reason I bring this chart up is that most developers have only hit a certain level of complexity in the thing they build. And if you've only built something as complex as a social media feed and you've never went further, you haven't built a video call app, you haven't built Figma in the browser, then a really weird thing happens. You stop acknowledging everything past that point. Your brain just blocks it out. So if you see the world like this, you think the social media feed, the Twitters of the world, that is the peak, that is the cap for complexity. Then anything beyond that point feels like mental illness to you. If you think complexity ends there, if you think that's as complex as the web can get, then you'll see everything going on past that point is entirely unnecessary, distracting, problematic, and bad and dangerous. The window that you're thinking in is going to drastically color the types of solutions you are and aren't interested in. So if this is where your line is, if you draw your line at the social media feed, then you see the stuff React does to handle even more complex things as I said before, mental illness. To you, it just seems entirely wrong and stupid. So if you think two-way binding is totally fine, and that's how most things should work, and anybody who's pushing hard for one-way binding is just trying too hard to make things more complex for no reason, you've never dealt with the complexity past that point. And that's okay. I just wish more people would recognize it. So what's sad for me here is I feel like the author and I are going to agree a lot here, but it seems like the author is doing the thing where everything past their point is bad and evil, and everything before their point is good and fine and help them get where they are. Let's see if that's where this goes. That's just my prediction. On my first job, I worked on exactly one such rewrite of a huge, unwieldy jQuery app into an Angular app. Both the process and the end results were pretty good. What was not good, though, was having to rewrite the exact same screens in Angular 2 a few years later. And I'm just happy I left the company early enough before they made me rewrite it for a third time in React later. That's bad management. I feel you on that. That sucks. Let's see where your bias against React came from. I didn't get a chance later to get to learn React and even use it professionally on a project or two. I still remember seeing how fresh it looked on first glance. At the time, the contrast was with the framework of the day, which was Angular 2, a complete rewrite of the original, but now with twice the boilerplate, TypeScript out of the box, one-way binding, reactive and observable patterns, all good things on their own, but goddamn was it complicated, slow to work on, slow to build, and slow to run. React swung the pendulum back to simplicity, and people were all up for it. And for a while, simplicity remained. React gained popularity to become the #1 library for making single-page apps. Yes, now we're using the term library again, showing how much simpler it really was. You can't reasonably build a complex app with just a library. You need a few of them to handle all of the app's concerns. But you also need some code structure. React's bring your own beer approach meant that you basically built a framework for yourself, with all the downsides that had. I agree. Since React was so focused on the component structure and the component model, it didn't solve very many other problems. And this did result in no two React apps being the same. Each one had a bespoke framework built out of random libraries that they found on the internet. Okay, this is where you're losing me. When you say random libraries found on the internet, you're intentionally downplaying what a lot of these are. Angular is a random framework you found on the internet. If you word it that way, it sounds a lot worse. You're choosing to make it sound bad here with stupid fucking wording. How about each of these had a bespoke framework built out of various libraries battle-tested by many Fortune 500 companies? We're saying the same thing, just one of those unfairly downplays these libraries, the other unfairly elevates them. You could have worded this as a wide set of libraries from various maintainers not directly tied to the React team, and gotten the main point across without being derogatory, but I get you're frustrated. Let's hear your frustrations out. The apps I had the misfortune to work on at the time all made me think the same thing. Even Angular 2 would be better than this. The JSX core always seemed solid. Solid JSX. I have a feeling I know where we're going with that. Everything else around it was just plain mess. So I got out and went writing some Java backends, which I believe says it all. This is really particularly funny to me because I had the opposite journey where I was really anti front end. In particular, when Angular happened, I was like, fuck all of this. You're making this way too complex for no reason. And the reason I felt that way is I had the same problem. I thought that everything right of this was mental illness. I thought static sites and e-commerce sites were the web. And if you needed something more complex than that, you were wrong. What I'm building is totally fine with PHP and a bit of jQuery. Why are you needing something more complex? It's because you suck and you're incompetent. Or so I thought when I was 18. I had to grow up a lot. Then I ended up at Twitch. And as I was at Twitch, I saw the complexity of the front end and the crazy Ember code base they were working in. And I laughed at them. And I went and built in my fancy Elixir stack all the backend tools and infrastructure that we needed for our video pipelines for the stuff we were doing at the time. And then that team got folded into another team. And that team was using Go. I did not like Go very much. Around the same time, Twitch started rewriting the website from Ember to React and TypeScript. And that was a really big moment for me because I still hated building for the web. I literally looked down on web devs, which is funny because most people think of me as a web dev now. No, my career is backend. But I started working in that code base because I was impressed with the hustle of the team that came in and said, no, we're rewriting this. And then hooks happened. And I'm a big functional programming nerd. So hooks got me to take React way more seriously, and I quickly became one of the main contributors to the website for Twitch and started getting more and more involved in the process of rewriting Twitch in React. I got hooked, as Dom just made the great pun for. The point I'm trying to make here is that I also thought that front-end stuff was terrible and way overly complex and missed the days of just jQuerying the things. So I was all in on back-end. React pulled me into the front end. React made me fall in love with what you could do and the complexity that was necessary at a company like Twitch, building a really complex interactive application. React made our lives so much simpler than the Ember shit show we were dealing with prior. It meant more people could contribute more things, more parts could be reused across the app, and better software could be written for our users as a result of switching to React. It was a huge win for us, and obviously for me as a developer, my career trajectory entirely changed as a result of me drinking the Kool-Aid, trying React more heavily, and falling in love with what you could do with it. And it's really funny to me that this developer seems to have had the opposite experience, where they went and wrote Java because they would rather do that than have their notion of how front-end's supposed to work be challenged this hard. Like, do you actually believe that the entire industry has picked Angular 2 onwards and React because we're all insane and wrong? This is a thing I always hate. Like, if the majority of people believe a thing, especially if the majority of experts in the field believe a thing and pick a specific thing, why do you think your weird insight is better than the entire industry? No, it's the kids who are wrong meme is what this is. Like, how do you look at an entire industry using these things and be like, you're unnecessarily complex, you have no idea what you're doing, when the best people in the world are working on these things? Anyways, just when I thought I was out. They say a man can never really learn anything. You either know something or you don't. I apparently don't, so I dragged myself back into React recently. Granted, it was a hobby project, so I didn't experience it in full like I would if it was a serious prod app. But still, even this experience both confirmed and greatly exceeded my low expectations for it. React feels insane, and I don't know how no one else is talking about it. This is where you're supposed to have the self-reflection moment of maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. Maybe I should talk to somebody who gets it better so that I can learn from them. Architecture, components, and state. Oh, before we get there, actually, I also want to call out the fact it was a hobby project. I have a feeling this hobby project probably wasn't that complex. We shall see. I am curious. I have a feeling this might not have been the best thing to put React on. Architecture, components, and state. First, let's start with the architecture React enforces for you. As said before, React's only a library, so it's not forcing you onto anything. But still, the implicit constraints of having JSX make some patterns surface on their own. Eons ago, we used to talk about MVC, MVVM, MVP, all of which only are variations on the same theme. So which is React? None. I believe this is a newish paradigm. I think we could literally call it component-based architecture. We'll see where he's going. On first glance, it's all logical. You have components, you build a top-down tree of them, and bam, there's your app. React does some internal magic to make sure it's up to date with the data you give it. Simple enough. But sometime along the way, it all started acting smarter than it really should be. For a simple UI library, React sure has a lot of loaded terms. And for a library that doesn't have anything to do with functional programming, it sure has a lot of functional programming names inside. Oh boy. Oh boy. Let's start from the state. If you have a top-down tree of components, it's logical you'd want to pass the state top-down too. But in practice, with components very numerous and small, this gets very messy, as you spend a lot of time and code just wiring the various pieces of data to get them where you need them. This was solved by sideloading state into components using React hooks. What? Oh god, this is gonna fall apart fast, isn't it? I haven't heard anyone complain about this, but are you guys serious? You're saying that any component can use any piece of app state. No, there is no such thing as app state. You built your own app state. There is no global state in React. You're adding it somehow. Are you expecting... Did you set up Redux in 2025 and get mad because it was more complex than your side project? Is that where this is going to go? We go back to my chart. Redux squarely fits like here. It's a very small range where Redux is actually particularly useful. And honestly, most code bases with Redux should be using it alongside something else, like TanStack. TanStack query, React query, whatever you want to call it, old name, new name, whatever. React query is useful all over the spectrum of where data is accessed in your app. And if you combine Redux with something like React query, now you can use React query for things that are server sync, for async bullshit, whatever else. And you can use Redux for the bits that are really client update heavy, that are very granular. You can adopt the right part for the thing you're doing. That's part of why the thing is so modular. That's why we have all these random libraries, as the author liked to call out earlier. Crazy that you didn't take the time to look at them. And I get it. You're expecting the framework to bring everything to you, and you're looking at the list of the popular option. You're like, okay, React doesn't have state, so I'm going to bring in one state library to solve all my problems. No. Oh god, this is getting worse. Any component can emit a state change that can update any other component. If you turned React into jQuery, that's your doing, not ours. So you didn't like passing props down to your components, which, by the way, people bitch about prop drilling way too much. Prop drilling is not a big deal, especially now in the AI world where you can just pass one prop one time and then tab complete carries you the rest of the way. I am very defensive of prop drilling. I think it gets way more shit than it deserves. You built a complex hole in your app because you wanted to avoid one line of code in 3 places. Just drill the fucking props. Who cares? It makes it very clear what cares about what. How did this even pass a code review? You're basically using a global variable just with more elaborate state mutation rules. They're not even rules, merely a ceremony, because nothing is really preventing you from mutating state anywhere. You'll really think if you give something a smart name, like a reducer, it suddenly becomes good architecture? Okay, so this is literally just bitching about Redux, isn't it? We'll see where we go. So if both top-down and side-loading approaches suck, what would be the solution? I honestly don't know. In fact, the only thing I can think of is, we can't solve this nicely. Maybe the entire component architecture was a mistake. We should have called it a paragon of nice design and stopped innovating. Maybe this time for a change, we really did need yet another JS framework and that would try something better. God, this is going to be a rant about Redux, isn't it? It's a shame because like the opening was solid. I had a lot of agreement and alignment with this author until they just stopped actually caring about the thing they're talking about. React hooks. Next in the things we're unsure how they pass code review, let's riff on React hooks. There's no denying they're useful, but their existence even to this day raises question marks above my head. Oh god. Hooks do to state what components did to elements. They make pieces that are complex and useful reusable. And they let you structure your component state around the state rather than structure the state around your component. The power of hooks is incredible. The fact that we can define a custom hook that has a complex behavior like a debounced change, and we can pass that hook to different places and reuse it is incredible. The amount that reusable hooks have benefited the things I am building is insane. Everything from weird scroll behaviors to debounced values and inputs to form management to global states. Hooks are really, really good. They're such a useful primitive for structuring your state. And the idea that your components should control state rather than the state controlling the components was wrong. And we've moved away from that for a reason. People, like if you come into hooks thinking that they're the same as the previous lifecycle components that React had and everything else did too. The component lifecycle, the idea of you run this on mount, you run this on change, you run this on unmount is wrong. It is wrong because the mount and unmount behaviors are determined by the state. You unmount the component in a certain state. You change the component in a certain state. The state should drive the components, not the other way. And hooks allow you to command and compose both. It's a really good change. And God, we're going to talk about pure functions. I'm not going to sit here and pretend React components are pure functions. I have never seen anybody talk about React components as pure functions. I asked AI, and it says it's helpful to write components as though they're pure, but they aren't. And I haven't seen people pretend React components are pure. You might be misremembering because before we had hooks, function components were pure because they had no state. They just were input-output. And then class components were the impure ones. But with hooks, function components stop being pure FP because they're not. They have the ability to change. Is a timer component pure? I render the component, it shows the timer in it, and you click start. It can't be pure. It's different at different times. As soon as you're doing anything interesting, purity isn't really an option. You can't do a reusable thing that is pure if it has any state at all. That is correct, yes. I'd mostly like to roast use effect here. It's simple what a side effect would be. You change a state, and then you need to do some external action, like post the results to an API. What? Oh God, no. Oh God, no. Please don't do this. Please. Oh God, do I have to turn this into a React, like, FYI video? That, it makes literally no... Why would you do that? There we go. My meme is made. I'll deal with the rest later. Destructive actions should go in the thing that triggers it, not in a use effect. This example even isn't great because chances are you're doing that on a user behavior. Like you're having the submission happen on press of enter or on hitting the submit button, those types of things. The point I'm trying to make here is that the destructive action should be when the user behavior occurs, not as an effect of it. The goal of effects is to synchronize things within React to things outside of React. There's a whole doc on this. You might not need an effect. They're an escape hatch from the React paradigm. They let you step outside of React and synchronize your component with some external systems like a non-React widget, network, or the browser DOM. If there's no external system involved, you shouldn't need an effect. Even if there is, if that external system's only being hit once as part of a user-driven action, it should be done there. Stop putting state in effects. Stop putting shit that doesn't belong there in effects. And chances are, if you're submitting to an API anyways, what you actually want is a mutation. So you should probably use something like the use mutation hook that comes with React Query. God, I see my hair getting frizzier as I get more stressed about this one. God. Like, yes, if you intentionally use React wrong, it sucks. If you treat every feature in React like it's meant to be used for everything, it sucks. Yes, absolutely. If I try to transfer 3 tons of stuff in a fucking Porsche, I'm going to think Porsches suck because I'm using it wrong. Use the right tool for the job. If I'm using a knife to eat food and not a fork, I'm going to think knives are terrible. You're using the wrong tool aggressively here. Honestly, when I teach people React, I avoid use effect for as long as I can. Teach them how to do all of the other things you can the right ways. And then when they hit enough edges that a use effect actually benefits you in, then we start bringing it in. If I look at a real code base, it's gotten a little worse. But if I exclude source front-end components, we only have 85 results across 30 files for our use effect usage. Use run on thread update. That we probably don't even need anymore. If no thread ID, yeah, it's all weird token limit stuff. The problem is that estimate tokens used to be a very slow function. It stopped being a slow function, so we don't need this to be there anymore. I can make this way cleaner now. A bunch of weird focus behavior stuff. Most of it's going to be weird focus behavior and persisting things in local storage. But we use effect very sparingly versus use state comes up over twice as often. Use query comes up a lot. Use mutation, which by the way, we actually don't call use mutation. We have use session mutation and query, and these get used a ton. Use effect is almost entirely used for weird focus management, weird scroll management, and weird browser bullshit. There is no place in our code base where a use effect triggers some external thing, like a fucking API call. That's the wrong way to use it. Theo, I bet you use effect the library more than use effect the hook. Absolutely. And funny enough, I actually like effect as an example to go back to here, where we're talking about like the complexity where something becomes useful. Effect.ts, the TypeScript, like it's a language built on top of TypeScript, the same way TypeScript's a language built on top of JS. It is a different way of thinking about types in TypeScript and your control flows to make things way more extensible, reliable, composable, and handle all the error type shit. I have a whole video about handling errors in JavaScript, and Effect is the end game of it. I have like the 3 tiers of how hard do you want to go on solving these problems. And Effect, very squarely, fits at a certain level of complexity. Mind you, it's not for front-end stuff directly, so it doesn't fit next to stuff like Redux or React Query if we're talking about this as like web application development. But if you think of this as a generic complexity, as your backends get more complex and are doing more annoying things like crazy intermingling of streams like we have to deal with T3 chat, or the hundreds of different async bullshit errors you can hit with something like upload thing, Effect becomes really useful. That's why I recommended it to my team. There's a problem though. I still don't know Effect. Like I've been working on it more. I started working on a project using it over the weekend. I would not call myself Effect pilled. I don't get it still. And a lot of the time I look at Effect, I see code that's like, well, why is that so complex? This looks terrible to me. But then I realize and remember and remind myself, I am thinking about this through the lens of somebody not solving these specific problems right now. And when I do, I have solutions and I know how painful those are. Enough smart people who are solving complex problems see the value in this. So I know it must have that value. Even if I can't see it yet, even if I can't appreciate those things yet, that doesn't mean they're not there. It doesn't mean it's not valid. And I still recommend Effect to my team and to other developers all the time. We're using it a ton for a lot of different shit that we build. Even though I don't know it, even though looking at it makes me feel like everyone is insane, I recognize that I just haven't gotten over the hump yet, and I don't talk shit on it as a result. I talk shit on Effect for things that it does wrong, that get in our way, get in fights with the team, and then they realize I'm right and walk it back, and then we find a crazy bug in Next that was the actual source of the problem. But I don't complain about everyone using it because they're obviously just wrong and lying to themselves. I know that even though I don't use or understand Effect that well, that it is an incredibly useful solution to a lot of different problems. My lack of knowledge in the thing does not preclude me from liking it, using it, or recommending it. It just precludes me from like evangelizing it much until I better understand it. You should be able to separate your lack of understanding of a thing from the thing not being understood. If I can't understand it, that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means I don't understand it. There are things that are just bad, like Flutter, but for the most part, if I don't understand a thing, that doesn't inherently mean it's bad. This developer seems to be struggling with that, as he has made apparent in some of his comments. The fact that he's putting server submissions in his use effects suggests very clearly that he doesn't know how to use React yet. And that is fine. You could even make the argument that it's too hard for him to learn React, and that's the problem, but that's not the argument he's making. He's saying everyone using it's insane. Imagine if I was to say, look at Effect syntax. You guys are seriously using generators? Who thinks that's a good idea? You're all insane. Why is nobody else saying this? That's very different from, Effect seems like a good solution for problems that I don't necessarily have, and it's hard for me to pick up the new syntax. It feels unnecessarily complex for the problems that I need to solve. Those two statements can come from the same place, but one of them is wrong. And that's the problem, is this author, despite having a good foundation, the start of this article was actually really solid, it falls apart because he's mistaking his misunderstanding of React for a thing that is universal. I have a video I'm planning for a while. I've talked about this in the past a ton of times. The stupidest bug I've ever seen. It's the bug where in the Twitch dashboard, we have, if I switch modes here, these quick action things. And when an ad is run, the state changes, and all of these have different states. When you're running something, it has a state for it is running. And in the running state, it has a different appearance. It has a timer on it. And then on the completed state, it has a different thing. And then it goes back to the awaiting or the pending state. The problem is that when you click it, it doesn't call the behavior directly. When I click one run minute ad break, it's not going to run the ad break. It's going to change the state of the button to running. And when it changes the state to running, then a use effect on that component, the new one that gets mounted, that's what triggers the behavior. The devs who create these actions don't have control of the on-click. The devs who provide these actions, because like this quick actions panel was created by the team that builds the dashboard, the creator team, but these buttons are created by different teams. The ad break button is by the ads team, and we don't give them access to the on-click. The on-click is a behavior that we deal with. As such, when this is clicked on, the creator team changes the state to running, and then the ads team has to have a use effect that actually triggers the behavior. And this has resulted in so many absurd fucking bugs. The most nasty one by far is that when you edit things, if I trigger this so it's in the running state. And then I edit the dashboard, like I move this to a different place. It will, on that update, persist the data on the page. And that includes the state that each of these buttons is in. So if I run the ad and then make a change, it's now persisted in the running state. And now, every time I open the page, it's going to start in the running state and immediately trigger that function. Because the function, which should be triggered by an on-click, isn't triggered by an on-click. It's triggered by a weird framework behavior. If the user's expectation is they click a button, the thing happens, your code should be on-click, the thing happens. Not on-click, this changes, and then that changes, and then that effect runs, and then this API call is made. Put the fucking call in the basket. Put the thing they're doing where they do it. Come on, this is like elementary JavaScript shit. I don't know why people still fuck this up. Everyone over-engineers everything, so they want to use every tool in their basket. If I hand you a fucking piece of wood with a nail in it and a bag of tools, I'm not asking you to figure out how to use every single tool to hammer the nail in. I'm asking you to find the hammer and put the nail in. It's just insanity. And I've seen so much bad code because of all of this. It's insane. I will emphasize that in my career, I've only seen this like 2 or 3 times ever. And I've read so much React code. I've audited so many code bases. If I've learned anything from that, is that if you're using React Query, you're exponentially less likely to do this bullshit. But beyond that, I've learned so much. And this isn't a failure case I see that often. I see effects misused, but I don't see effects being used as on-click very often. I don't see effects being used as on-change very often, because that's not what it's for, and that's apparently so. If you're using effects that way, you're using them very wrong. And yes, if you're using React that wrong, I see why you hate it. If you're trying to hammer a bunch of nails in with a knife or a screwdriver, you're going to hate knives and screwdrivers. That's just the nature of using things wrong. I hate this. Oh God, it gets worse. My biggest gripe, for starters, is that useEffect is used as a run something after the component mounts. I understand when React migrated from classes to hooks, this was the closest alternative to component did mount. But come on, how is this not considered a huge hack? It kind of is. The reality is that you don't need to do this very often. How often are you actually triggering something on component mount? You're using a side effect hook to initialize the component? Okay, if you have to make an API call from there, I agree that would be a side effect. But if the API call sets state, completely knock you a side effect, can make state, okay, cool, yeah. You shouldn't be fetching state and use effects. Don't do this. This is code that they've taken from a production app of a company recently acquired for several tens of millions of US dollars. Redacted it to use house and cat. Don't do this. I mocked out this example because I want to show just how bad it is. We're going to get rid of these console logs where we have these weird effects that are dependent on each other. This is awful. I want to presume that these functions are getting something externally, and we'll even presume that build map is slow. Probably not, but we'll assume it is. I have these mocked functions here. We have get linked cats. Let's make this async and delay it. Now it's delayed 500 milliseconds. We'll do the same for build map. Make this async and delay it 200 milliseconds. Fix the async stuff. What's even funnier here is that get linked cats wasn't async in the original example. Otherwise, it would have been a dot then. So I'm actually making a harder example here, something that would theoretically make this even worse. We have demo 2 here. We are doing all this complex stuff where we're mapping, building, whatever. What we want is linked cats, selected cats, house map cats, houses, yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. So let's just go through and unfuck this. So the first thing that I'm seeing that's really annoying is that these deterministic states that are related to other states, where linked cats creates and gets you the links and the selected like initial value. Then we have the use effect here for building the map after. Terrible, awful. First thing we need to do is install tanstack query. Hop over to tanstack, click tanstack query, npm install. Now we need a query. Let's const testing equals use query. And import that from tanstack react query. Cool. We give it a key. This is going to be for linked cats. And we have data. We also have a couple other things. Is loading, error, and a few other useful things that come out of this. We also have the thing we're here for, async query function. So what we could do here is just fetch linked cats and return that like we're doing in this first effect. But I'm going to show you guys where this gets really fun. Const linked cats equals await get linked cats. We can just return it and be good to go, but I want to go a bit further because we have other things we care about. We also want to have the selected cat. We'll deal with that in a little bit because more importantly, I don't like that we're just setting it to the 0th cat by default. If we had it select an index, that'd make more sense, but we don't, so it's just dumb. We'll figure out selected cat in a sec. The thing I care more about by far is that at the end here, we have the build map that sets the house map cats. Silly, but whatever. Const house map cats. Oh wait, build map. Okay. Let's delete the things we don't need anymore. Huh. Most of that code just got deleted. We can clear that out. We can clear this out. We still have to deal with selected cat, but we'll do that in a moment. Now we have linked cats and house map cats, which are either existing or undefined. Crazy. And now we can just use them. In fact, we can go further. We can have loading states, which the other code could not have done. If is loading, return div loading. If no data, return div error unable to load data. And if we do this after, then the undefined case goes away because we're using TypeScript, which is a good solution. And now we know house map cats and link cats have to exist because those functions are typed properly. And now all of the code below just works. We're not using the set selected cat right now, but my ideal solution there would be that we take everything else and we wrap it with another component so that we can have the interactive part only exist after we fetch all the data we need. Like, it's not that hard to do. You just grab use query, you write the async code that does all of the different things you need to do, you return it, and then you show it. Now we've handled all those states. Crazy. Absurd. I just, like, if you've never even heard of React Query, refuse to use external libraries, and then reinvent everything yourself with a bunch of use effects in the component, which, by the way, if your state's that complex, don't do it in a component, do it in a custom hook. And you can go make your own use query. It's not that hard to do. But the chaos that we are seeing in this article is so painfully self-inflicted. And okay, I'll try to reframe this. It is an incredible achievement that React is such a competent framework that developers this incompetent can use it and actually ship at all. It's impressive that despite the IQ of the people who write this code being like low 80s at best, that the code works. That's impressive. That's an achievement. The fact that there are so many people that don't understand the basics of software development, writing code that functions in production, that can be at a company that sells for tens of millions of US dollars, that's an accomplishment. It's pretty cool that this framework enables people that stupid to do anything at all. But yeah, don't fucking do this. Don't do this. If we take this triggered first, second, third, fourth, let's look at this. Oh, this gets triggered on load. This happens, then this result comes in. And then the rest is the state of the UI. If we're still loading, we show loading. If no data comes in after loading is done, then we show an error. Otherwise, we render the correct state. Or if we go back here, they have a whole section on fetching data. Many apps use effects to kick off data fetching. Quite common to write data fetching effects like this. You don't need to move this fetch to an event handler. Doesn't matter where this all comes from. They give an example of how to use it right here. Do they call out? Yeah, they have a use data custom hook that was made here to solve this problem. You can build a hook like this yourself or use one of the many solutions already available in the React ecosystem. They should just call out React Query here, like they really should. It's also of note that most of these frameworks like Next.js, Remix, etc., all have better ways to load data so the component doesn't exist until the data exists. These problems are all solved. I remember how JavaScript promises were considered unwieldy with their thens, and even before then we had callback hell. But literally anything would be better than this. Then look for literally anything else. I understand these issues can be solved by A, moving them into a separate file, which is just hiding the problem. Don't do that. Or B, probably with some Redux or something. But I really don't have enough mileage with it to know for sure. I'm going to go insane. They do call out React Query, use SWR, and React Router, all as valid options for this. It's hard to build a React app without involving React Query, SWR, React Router, Next.js, Remix, or any of the many different things that can better handle data fetching. Let's talk about the patterns. All of this combined looks ugly and betrays the simplicity that React promised in its Hello World example. But wait, I'm not done yet. I read a blog post from an acquaintance called The Most Common React Design Patterns. It's for a thing I don't know what. I was still shocked at how complicated these are and how much mental overhead there is to simply figure out what's happening. All of that just to render a list of items on a screen. The most jarring thing is the article doesn't even acknowledge it. The complexity is taken for granted. People apparently really build their UIs like this and no one bats an eye. Okay, I'm so curious about this article. Hawks. No one uses Hawks anymore. How old is this article? February of this year? No one's using higher order components in 2025. Come on, man. Why is this the first example? No one is doing this in 2025. These are bad practices now. No one does that. Render props was a really weird solution from years ago that has been out of date it was out of date when it came out. Container presentation. Oh God, where's this one going? Okay, this one's not as bad. It's you abstract out the loading layer first, which is fine. I mentioned it before. To do this in a way that isn't shitty and pretending that these things deserve pretentious names, what that would be is if loading return that, if no data return that, and then we know we have data, so we return actual demo component with the data already in it. And then you can skip the rest and implement, oh, look at that. It happened automatically because I'm using a competent text editor. Crazy. Absurd. Who would have thought that a fucking AI text editor could literally implement the better solution in 5 clicks and a tab key? Why would you publish an article in 2025 focused on patterns that have been outdated since 2017? Not trying to be an asshole, just genuinely really confused about why these things keep coming up. It only serves to fuel React haters and confuse people who are trying to learn how to write React correctly. At least acknowledge something like React query in the future, maybe? I'm annoyed. Look at all the code he wrote here instead of just fucking using React query or SWR or anything else. I'm slowly going insane. Yeah, if you're only citing your colleague that is writing an article about things that have been outdated for 8 years, I understand why you think React is more complex, and it's insane that the article doesn't acknowledge it. Here's me acknowledging it. The patterns we came up with before hooks were bad. That's why we made hooks, to get rid of all of those things. We recognize now that render props and higher order components are bad abstractions. That's why hooks happened, so we could better abstract our logic around state. You're conflating the solution and the problem as though they're the same thing and they're both problems. That's not my problem to solve. I'm sorry that you had this bad experience learning the stuff, but you're picking the wrong shit. Also, CSS and JS is something I and many React people have never stood for. That's why we like Tailwind. I have a feeling this guy does not like Tailwind. I agree that JSX initially showed that separation of concerns is not separation of files, and that it's actually okay to write your HTML and JS in the same file. But chucking in CSS there too and making it strongly typed, isn't this a step too far? No. I have a feeling you've never even come close to Tailwind. Oh God, the why. It would be too easy to just say React is, well, downright insane and go on with our lives. But as reasonable primates, I believe we can do better. You know, like reading the docs, that would be better. Man, the first third of this was actually a really good setup, and it falls apart so fast as soon as you start confidently talking about a thing you have not read the docs for. I'm once again tripping down the memory superhighway to get reminded of my first job, and a colleague from that job mentioned the jQuery migration project. A super experienced backend engineer, an architect type, and an overall very respected guy when it came to all things software. What I remember most about him are not his technical solutions, but the amount of judgment he'd have shown on anything we did on front end. Looking at anything on the Angular app, he was like, what the hell are you guys doing? Why does this have to be so complicated? And it's not that we sucked. We'll pass on that. We too were a no-nonsense crew about the software. It's just that at the time, through the eyes of a classical backend dev, the entire Angular setup seemed absolutely insane. Remember that diagram I drew at the beginning of this filming session? If you exist to the left of one of these lines, everything to the right of it is the box of bad ideas and insanity. Depending on where your experience ends and where your focus is, everything to the right of the line is going to feel like mental illness. If the backend guy thinks in terms of HTML documents being sent to the browser, he's going to say everything to the right there is insane. If he's actually building a little bit of social media type stuff, he might think Angular is totally fine, but React goes a bit too far, and Redux is terrible. If they're building to here, they might actually quite like React and even like Redux, but stuff like Effect, stuff like more complex UI paradigms, they'll get really stressed about. That's just the nature of how your own comprehension of things works. When you live in the trenches of a thing, the other things all seem insane to you. Like, why is that so complex? You just can't see past where you are right now. Today, I'm roughly the same age as he was then, and I'm here writing a blog post about how React is insane. Some things are inevitable, I guess. But let's rise a step above and try to understand why it could be so. Firstly, I think that we all can agree that most web apps shouldn't even be web apps in the first place. If you view the web as a function of the number of websites and URLs, sure. If we want to talk about what most URLs should be, probably shouldn't be React. But if we want to talk about where most time is spent on the web, that's a very different thing. Most cars are broken down and in dumps. Does that mean new cars should be broken down and in dumps too? No, that's the natural consequence of where most cars go, the dump. That doesn't mean, God, this point always drives me insane because sure, the average website has nothing on it, but that's very different from the average session. There are way more websites that are really boring, but way more time spent on the web is on the things that aren't. What do you think gets more traffic? Twitter or 10,000 random WordPress blogs? Well, there's 10,000 of those blogs, so clearly you don't need React. What the fuck are you even saying? Are you using your brain? Are you thinking, sir? If you measure the web by the number of URLs using the thing you like, then you're stupid in bad faith. Like, I'm sorry, I don't have any other way to put it. You're just not thinking this through. The majority of engineers are working on things more complex because those 10,000 WordPress sites could be maintained by 2 people. One component on Twitter probably needs at least 1 person working on it. This is the difference. The level of complexity in the things people are working on isn't because the other 10,000 sites are right and the popular ones are wrong. It's because the popular ones are more complex and do more and need more engineers. More engineers are working in React because more things are being built in ways that need that. And I don't care how you feel about it, you're just wrong. Most dashboards are interactive enough that they benefit from React. The average website's a blog. I don't fucking care about the average website. I care about the average session. If you take the median point for where a session is on the web, what time is spent where? Do you think the time is being spent more on static sites or dynamic ones? There's a right answer and a bad faith answer, and I'm scared about which one the author would pick here. Having a simple, dumb server-side rendered page is orders of magnitude simpler than even thinking about React. There's no overhead with API communication. Front-end is very lightweight. Your UI code can be strongly typed if your backend is strongly typed. Good luck writing type-safe HTML on whatever server solution you're using. Good luck handling all the different properties that a div might or might not have. If I do data dash overload equals whatever, that's fine, but overload equals whatever isn't, because that's not a real property. If your backend solution for writing this does that, awesome. There's a good chance it's actually React that you're writing there. Anyways, you're lying is what you're doing. Everything will load faster is false. Watch any of my videos about how HTML renders and how the web works to learn why there. I'm not going to go in depth here. I've already went on enough tangents. You can cache it better because some components are static and remain the same for all users, so you can render them only once, etc., etc. You're just saying words, man. You lose the flexibility to have complex interactive logic at your product manager's whim. No, you lose the ability to have things on the page change when the user does things on it without loading a whole new page. That's only partially true, because I'd wager you can go a pretty long way with just plain JS progressive enhancement before you really get to a state management complex enough to warrant adding React in there. I thought you didn't like the state management in React. I'm going to go insane. Apparently we're only using React because inertia's a hell of a drug and it's the thing that we all picked. We all picked these other things. We all moved off them. Nonsensical argument. And weren't you saying earlier that we're picking random libraries? We're picking random libraries and every React code base is the same. You can't make the inertia argument. You already countered that argument like 5 times in this article. God, how does this fall apart so fast every time? I think the code is bad because making an interactive UI where any component can update any other component is simply one of the most complicated things you can do in software. I agree, which is why you shouldn't do it. You should have your components go top down so that behaviors make sense. If a component can be updated by something else, it should pass the function to do the update to it. Think of any other system you use in your everyday life. Your kitchen sink has 2 inputs, hot and cold, and 1 output, a water running. Your kitchen mixer or power drill might have a button or 2. And still, whatever you do, it only affects the action on the spinning part. Yeah, you're choosing what behaviors are and aren't exposed. The power drill chooses different wattages, but you're not manually switching the wattage and the amperage. You're exposing the functionality that you intend for someone to have access to, the way you do when you design things. The problem is that you didn't design anything in your React code base. You just shit together APIs you didn't understand. Oh, okay. So because everything can update everything, it's all infinite numbers of inputs and outputs, and nothing can ever be clean. So we should just go back to jQuery. No, React makes it way easier to choose what you do and don't expose. So how can we fix this? I'm not smart or in the weeds enough to really solve the problem, but I can spitball some ideas. I'm going to beat you to this one. I have an idea for you, sir. There's this website, react.dev. There's a button on here that says Learn React. You should try clicking it at some point and read through this. You might be surprised at how much easier it is to use React once you know React. Crazy, I know, but just give it a shot, perhaps. Let's see what he proposes instead, because I have a feeling I'm going to get more angry. If we adopt this input-output mental model of a web page as a real thing, then maybe we could start working on reducing a number of its inputs and outputs. On the input side, yeah, this is me saying, go have fewer buttons, which maybe not always or ever is enforceable. But certainly, the less features you have, the more manageable your code base is. Gonna go insane. It's straightforward enough to need no mentioning, or is it? Do product managers know that adding 3 buttons instead of 2 will cause 5% more bugs and make any future work on that screen 30% more complicated to design and implement? Not if you build it competently. Why is it that if I told you we need to add Redis on backend, you will tell me, no, we need to curb the technical complexity? I wouldn't tell you that. I would ask why. Why do you think we need Redis on the backend? What benefit do we get? Oh, we have queries that are way too slow? Yeah, we should probably cache those queries. But if a product manager asks to add a global app-wide filter that could be applied from anywhere and to anything, you'd just get your head down and write some monstrosity that people will spend the next 10 years trying to get out of. If it's a global app-wide filter, it probably belongs in the URL bar, at which point it's very easy for everything to access. What the fuck are you even saying? In short, please stop adding so many buttons. I beg you. You could even, I know, crazy, try to remove some of them. This guy just doesn't work on complex things. It always comes down to that. Every time. Okay, finally, a thing I can agree with. If you are doing traditional pure rendering from the server where the client can't change anything, that is a lot closer to pure functional programming. Input, output, done. But then you have no interaction whatsoever. Yeah, chat seems to have caught on. This is just drivel now. It's gibberish. He's yapping. It's fallen apart. It's sad because like this article opened well. I actually had my hopes up when I started reading this. It just fell apart so fast. Oh, he discovered islands of interactivity. Okay, so you'll Google search for alternatives, but you won't Google search for a solution to the problem. Why do you spend more time writing articles about how bad the thing is than reading the docs on how to use the thing? I would put my fucking life savings on it that this author spent more time writing this article and researching points for this article than he spent reading the docs for React. There's like a 5-to-1 ratio there, probably. There is no way someone can write this while understanding the framework. I left my thoughts. I'm not going to keep reading this. Don't harass the author, please, or the author of the other blog post. I'm just so fatigued about the sheer volume of these types of things. Also, hilariously enough, this guy's not good at building things because some of these links are target blank and some aren't. If you're going to an external source, please target blank the link. If you hate the web, that's fine, but like, god damn. I can't take these people seriously. I got nothing else on this one. I'm going to go fucking insane. Hopefully I didn't drive you guys mad in the process. Thanks for sticking through this one with me. And until next time, peace nerds.